From the vantage point on the rusted watchtower, the panorama of artificial waterways spanned the horizon like a tapestry of glimmering ribbons. At one time, the seas and rivers had been vibrant, sustaining life across the planet. But centuries of pollution, climate catastrophes, and overuse had reduced them to toxic sludge. In a final, desperate attempt to salvage human survival, governments and corporations once collaborated to create a global network of synthetic rivers, each carefully treated and purified. These new arteries of life wove across continents, an engineered labyrinth, funneling the planet's last supply of clean water. Now, years after their construction, a paramilitary force known as the River Lords guarded them. They patrolled these waterways with unwavering vigilance, ensuring that no drop reached those deemed unworthy. Malin Reno crouched on the tower's platform, her gaze scouring the water's surface. Though it dazzled in the twilight, she knew the veneer of peace masked a brutal reality. Daily she witnessed how the water's care and rationing had turned into an ironclad tyranny. From her vantage point, she spotted Captain Barron's patrol boat chugging along below. Barron, a grizzled figure with a reputation forged in countless bloody raids, guided his sleek vessel methodically, searching for any sign of contraband activity. He wore the insignia of the River Lords, a stylized wave etched onto his armor. Malin knew he was thorough. Even from her lofty perch, she could spot the keen glint of his binoculars sweeping the banks. She ducked lower, hoping the tangle of rusting steel beams around her would keep her invisible. For months, she'd been working on transporting water filters, seeds, and purified drones to settlements that the River Lords had abandoned. In their strict water distribution, only the largest enclaves, those capable of paying the hefty tributes, received regular shipments. Isolated hamlets, starving for water, languished in parched misery. The authorities found them expendable. Malin did not. She lived in the shadows, ferrying stolen supplies and braving the patrols. In a world where a single jug of uncontaminated water could command a black market fortune, she did not do it for money. She did it because, once upon a time, her family had relied on the help of a nameless smuggler who gave them vessels of life. Now she felt duty-bound to pay that kindness forward. When Barron's boat drifted downstream, Malin let out a breath she'd been holding. She scrambled down the tower's corroded ladder and landed on the muddy riverbank, her boots sinking into damp silt. Trudging through sparse reeds, she kept a hand ready on her sidearm. The River Lords only needed the slightest hint of an illicit presence before they'd swarm like hornets. At her makeshift hideout, she peered behind a collapsed retaining wall that concealed a narrow watercraft about the length of 4 men. The hull, a spectrum of chipped paint and welded patches, might not have looked impressive, but inside waited compartments stuffed with prohibited filters and harvest seeds. A single mistake during her journey could place her fate into the River Lord's hands. She'd heard too many stories of smugglers found floating face down in the current, throats slit as a stark reminder to anyone daring to break their monopoly. Stepping onto the vessel, Malin prepared to start the modified engine that ran almost silently on scavenged solar cells. Before the meltdown of the old world, advanced technology had been everywhere. Now it was priceless salvage. She turned the key, and the machine sputtered to life with only the gentlest hum. Taking the helm, she navigated into the center of the channel, every sense alert to the faintest sound of pursuit. The silver moonlight illuminated countless small ripples, giving the false impression of serenity. Malin knew better than to relax. She had 3 days to reach the settlement of Ashwood Bend, a village perched on an abandoned farmland miles inland from any official water station. Until recently, Ashwood Bend's inhabitants had survived by collecting dew each morning and filtering brackish puddles after the rare rain. Then came a cholera outbreak. Word reached Malin that dozens of children now languished in improvised clinics. Without genuine purification and adequate water, the settlement would collapse. Malin had no illusions that the River Lords would ever divert official shipments there. Ashwood Bend wasn't on the maps or the pay lists. Half a mile downstream, she glimpsed a pair of unmanned drones circling overhead. They moved in smooth arcs, scanning the region with cameras and thermal sensors. Her chest tightened. Getting caught that early in her journey would doom her cargo. With no viable alternative route, She cut the engine's power and let the boat drift. She hoped the darkness and the reeds cloaking the channel edges would be enough to hide her from the roving eyes above. It was impossible to remain motionless for long. The sky was beginning to lighten, strips of lavender blossoming into dawn. Darkness had become her friend, but it was an advantage that would soon vanish. Having little choice, she fired up the engine again and guided the vessel out of the drone's scanning radius. She prayed that she wouldn't blunder straight into another patrol. Near midday, Malin beached her craft in a small cove, flanked by bulrushes, seeking shelter from the high sun. The thunder of a hydrofoil engine reverberated across the river corridor, and her mind raced. Slowly she peered over the reeds and watched one of the official Riverlord's hovercraft cruising nearby. Painted a deep obsidian, the craft cut through the water with ominous grace. On its deck, uniformed officers clutched assault rifles, scanning the vegetation along the riverbank. Leading them was Lieutenant Schuyler, easily identifiable by her silver epaulets. Malin had never thought of Schuyler as cruel, but she was known to follow orders to the letter, and the orders were, unambiguously, to shoot on sight any unauthorized vessel carrying large volumes of water or water contraband. A single misstep would lead to an immediate confrontation. Malin carefully guided her boat deeper into the reeds, pulling netting over her cargo. She spent what felt like an eternity lying there in the muddy water, motionless. Thoughts of her own childhood drifted through her mind, huddling around small fires, rationing every spoonful of water. She recalled the moment when an unknown smuggler saved her parents with fresh water and a stolen filtration tablet. That memory steeled her nerves against the fear threatening to paralyze her now. Finally, the sound of the hydrofoil receded into the distance. Malin dared to breathe again. Although her back and legs had gone numb from crouching in place, she stretched gingerly, wincing as pins and needles lanced through her limbs. To continue the journey in daylight was risky, yet she knew time was short for Ashwood Bend, with no guarantee the waterborne diseases would wait. She needed to reach them soon if she was to make any difference at all. As she steered back into the main channel, the heat of the midday sun pressed down on her. The world above the river shimmered. No breeze stirred the water's surface, which lay mirror smooth and impossibly silent. Every once in a while, she caught a glimpse of bleached bones or twisted metal protruding from the shallows, remnants of the dead water wars, a series of violent conflicts that raged when the old freshwater sources ran dry. Once, she passed a large sign half submerged by the banks, "All hail the Great Purification." Malin had heard stories of that era, of propaganda urging people to support the artificial river project as humanity's salvation. The sign now stood crooked, testimony to the shattered promises of a lost time. By late afternoon, Malin navigated through a more remote stretch of the network, known for unpredictable currents and minimal patrols. The risk of running aground or striking debris was high, but it offered the advantage of stealth. Few dared these dangerous offshoots, and the Riverlords rarely ventured here. She guided the vessel carefully, scanning for half-submerged hazards. The boat shuddered when it scraped against an unseen rock, but kept going. Night descended without further incident. Stars winked in the enormous sky, free of light pollution. Gliding quietly, Malin switched off the engine once more, letting the current drift her through a serpent-like bend. On a small bluff overlooking the water, she spotted a line of flickering lights, possibly torches. Might it be a Riverlord's outpost? Or was it another group, maybe scavengers or other smugglers? She made the decision to pass by swiftly, hugging the opposite bank. As she neared, she noticed silhouettes moving amidst the light. Perhaps it was a settlement. She could also make out tall fences ringed with barbed wire. The sight gave off a fierce glow, and watchtowers dotted the perimeter. Either they were extremely paranoid survivors or something far more organized. She had heard rumors of breakaway paramilitary factions claiming territories along these remote segments. They were sometimes more brutal than the Riverlords. Deciding not to linger, she guided her boat forward into the safety of deeper shadows. Before dawn, she finally allowed herself a moment's rest near a collapsed overpass that formed a sheltered nook. She tied her craft to a broken pylon and gently lowered a net in the water to capture minnows for food. Her rations of freeze-dried meals were slimming day by day, ever more valuable than gold. The minutes stretched as she waited in the darkness, listening for the slightest sign of pursuit. Only frogs croaked from the reeds, thunder rumbled in the distance, though few genuine storms ever came, the globe's climate so broken that perfectly normal weather patterns were now a memory. Still, every drop that might fall was precious. Morning found her drifting past what had once been farmland, now transformed into arid wasteland. As the sun climbed higher, a wide rover soared above, carrying the emblem of the River Lords, scrawled in stenciled black across its bellow. She quickly released the net, yanked the engine's starter, and made for a thick growth of vegetation near the bank. The craft overhead roared by, oblivious or at least disinterested. She let out a trembling breath. By her reckoning, she was close to Ashwood Bend. A final day, maybe less if her luck held. Yet luck proved fickle. By mid-afternoon, she came upon a makeshift blockade of metal spikes jutting across the narrow channel, a tactic used by river pirates to ensnare unsuspecting travelers. Mullen, forced to kill the engine, drifted forward slowly, searching for a gap. The blockade was cunningly constructed, leaving just enough room for someone who knew exactly where to navigate. She was about to thread through an opening when someone shouted from the bank. A ragged figure appeared, brandishing an old rifle. "Stop where you are," the figure barked. He waved the weapon unsteadily, but Malin recognized the desperation plain on his face. "Show me your cargo." Malin tensed, her heart pounding. Any confrontation risked damaging the valuable goods, but compliance might lead to theft or worse. Still, better at least to attempt negotiation than to have bullets tear through her filters. "Easy," she called, lifting her empty hands. "I carry medical supplies and water filters, so on my way to a settlement that needs them." The man let out a bitter laugh. "Sure you are. Probably working for the River Lords, out scouting for easy prey." More people emerged. A woman in a frayed uniform, missing its insignia, 2 teenagers clutching improvised blades, and an older man leaning on a walking stick. They looked underfed, yet their eyes sparkled with an edge of hardened resilience. Malin recognized them for what they were, exiles, pushed out of the official enclaves. Instead of dying quietly, they had chosen defiance. "I'm not with the River Lords," Malin swore. "See for yourself." She slowly lifted the tarp to expose the crates. One contained herbal medicines and seeds, while the other was stacked with water filters. The ragged group's expressions shifted at once from suspicion to longing. A murmur rippled among them. Water filters in their possession would mean survival. They could transform even the most brackish dregs into something drinkable. A man with sunken cheeks cast a greedy eye toward her cargo. The woman in the worn uniform held her gaze. "We need those," she said quietly. "Our children haven't had a single drop of clean water in days." Malin's instincts warned her that giving them everything outright was dangerous. She had to reach Ashwood Bend. But these people were also on the razor's edge of survival. Her cargo was finite, though she had a handful of smaller spare filters. "I can spare a few, enough to tide you over. In return, you let me pass." The group glanced among themselves. After a brief silent debate, they nodded. Malin retrieved 2 of the filters, careful not to reveal the entire stash. She handed them over. The tension in the air dissipated slightly, but not entirely. The older man's hands trembled as he accepted the filters. In an unspoken exchange, the exiles lifted part of the spiked blockade, allowing just enough space for her boat to slip through. Malin let out the breath she'd been holding and maneuvered forward. She felt their eyes on her until the bend in the channel finally veiled her from their view. She traveled the rest of the day with heightened wariness. The presence of river pirates and exiles meant that chaos reigned beyond the official enclaves, that desperation had reached a boiling point. She also couldn't ignore the fact that her living depended on breaking the laws. She was neither hero nor saint, but she tried to remain mindful of her purpose. People needed help, and the River Lords weren't providing it. Night was falling again when she spotted the faint glow of lanterns near the bank. Nestled behind a fringe of battered trees and half-ruined homesteads, She glimpsed the settlement of Ashwood Bend. She could just make out the crooked silhouettes of buildings that had once housed families back when water was more plentiful. The structures now stood precariously, some propped up by stilts, their roofs lined with improvised rain collectors. Though the settlement had tried to adapt, losing the natural rivers devastated them. Molland eased the boat onto a makeshift dock of splintered boards lashed together. A few watchers with haggard eyes quickly approached, weapons raised, but their apprehension melted when someone recognized her. A gaunt woman in a patched coat rushed forward, an expression of relief on her face. "You actually came back," the woman said, nearly breathless. "We didn't think. We heard rumors the Riverlords were tightening patrols along the entire southwestern sector." Malin cast a quick glance around the settlement. She spotted the black circles under people's eyes, the brittle hair indicating malnutrition. Children hovered in doorways, their skinny arms clutching each other for comfort. An older man lay on a stretcher, his shallow breathing audible. She noticed the look of quiet desperation that permeated the place. "I promised I'd return," Malin replied, trying to muster a reassuring smile. "I brought seeds, water filters, and some basic medical kits." She pried open the boat's compartments, revealing the cargo. The villagers crowded around, a collective gasp rising as they saw real hope for clean water. Sweaty palms reached out, trying to help unload the supplies. Malin instructed them on how to assemble the filters. Although the instructions were straightforward, many of the residents were too exhausted to focus. Then came a hollow cry from up by the largest shack. The anxious hush suggested something dire. Malin set aside the crate she was lifting. She bounded towards the sound, pushing her way through the throng and ducking under a sagging doorway. Inside, the stench of sickness hit her. Rows of thin mattresses lined the floor, with the ill laid out in neat rows, each one looking more pale than the last. She spotted children no older than 6 or 7, their foreheads glistening with sweat, their lips cracked from dehydration. A lone survivor in a blood-stained apron kneeled by a child's bedside, performing rudimentary medical care. Malin crouched beside them. "I have some antibiotics," she said softly, "and I brought fresh water. Let's get these children hydrated." Tears welled in the caretaker's eyes as they gently took the supplies from Malin. Somewhere in the corner, another unfortunate soul coughed faintly, a frail sound that spoke volumes of the body's gradual collapse. With trembling urgency, children were given small sips of purified water, their eyes flickering with surprise at the refreshing taste. For the rest of that night, Malin worked alongside the Ashwood Bend residents, distributing small but vital quantities of water, handing out seeds that could grow in minimal moisture conditions, and demonstrating how to operate the newly acquired filters. Though she felt fatigue gnawing at her bones, she pressed on, fueled by a sense of duty. Every time she saw a child's face brighten as they swallowed a mouthful of truly clean water, she felt her own heart lighten. Perhaps this was the only small redemption left in a world that had become so harsh and unforgiving. In the early hours of the morning, she decided to make one last round of the settlement before attempting a quick rest. She stepped outside, inhaling the still, dry air. Just as she took a deep breath, the staccato echo of gunfire erupted on the far side of the village. Panic seized her. Shouts and screams filtered through the darkness. In the distance, flashlight beams danced erratically. She rushed toward the commotion, joined by several villagers clutching battered shotguns and farming tools. Heart pounding, Malin rounded a corner to witness a horrifying sight. A detachment of Riverlords, spearheaded by Captain Berend himself, had reached the outskirts of Ashwood Bend. How had they tracked her? Perhaps the exiles or pirates had revealed her route under threat, or maybe they'd simply followed the smuggler whispers. Whatever the reason, they'd found the settlement. Warning shots sizzled through the air, forcing the unarmed or lightly armed villagers to scatter. "Hands in the air," Berend bellowed, stepping forward. "This settlement is illegally harboring stolen filtration units. You're in violation of water regulation codes." His muzzle flared as he fired a burst into the sky, evidently aiming to terrify them into compliance. A few villagers dropped their weapons, fear etched across their faces, but others gripped their rifles with trembling defiance. They had been pushed into dire straits. Surrendering the filters likely meant certain death from thirst, just at a slower pace. Malin cursed under her breath. She darted behind a fallen beam, scanning for a way to intervene. The unstoppable might of the Riverlords overshadowed the meager resistance. One swift crackdown could raze Ashwood Bend, leaving the survivors with nothing. Barrand and his squad advanced, boots crunching over broken gravel. She watched them swing their rifles, corralling anyone in sight. It was then that a handful of villagers set off Molotov cocktails they'd prepared during the earlier war. The improvised bombs soared through the night air, shattering near the Riverlords. Flames burst up, forcing them to scatter. Barrand roared for his troops to return fire. Bullets sparked against corrugated metal walls. Chaos erupted. The Riverlords, trained in tactical maneuvers, quickly fanned out, taking cover. The villagers, however courageous, had limited ammunition and skill. Malin realized that a direct confrontation spelled doom, but she couldn't stand by as the settlement was destroyed. Circling around the burning debris, she reached the rear flank of the Riverlords. With a well-placed shot, she disabled a soldier's firearm, then ducked. Another soldier spun towards her, only to receive a quick blow to the temple from Malin's makeshift baton. She fought with desperation, adrenaline surging through her limbs. Yet she knew that each bold move placed her precariously close to a bullet's path. In the flickering light, Malin caught sight of Barrand advancing. He recognized her instantly, his hardened expression lit by the blaze. "You," he growled, voice thick with scorn. "You're the smuggler we've been chasing. I should have known." She raised her pistol, but he lunged with surprising speed, knocking the weapon aside. They wrestled, grappling in the dirt. With a swift twist, he pinned her to the ground, the muzzle of his rifle pressed against her neck. Time seemed to congeal. The chaotic discomfort of the settlement's screams and blazing fires receded into a dim roar in Malin's ears. All she could see was Barrand's face, twisted by unwavering loyalty to the oppressive code he lived by. "That water belongs to the system," he hissed, leaning in close. "You have no right to steal it, or distribute it as you see fit. Because of you, these people think they can do without the Riverlord." A faint flicker of guilt registered in his eyes, but it vanished quickly, replaced by the stony resolve of a man with orders. Crime cannot go unpunished. A bullet whizzed past, splattering sparks against a metal drum. Barrand flinched for half a second. That was all Malin needed. She wrenched free of his grip, rolling to one side. A feral scream tore from her lips as she grabbed a broken piece of rebar and swung, striking his forearm. He howled, dropping his rifle. She scrambled away, retrieving her pistol with shaking hands. Gunshots echoed relentlessly as the villagers made one last, desperate stand. Some members of Barrand's squad found themselves backed into a corner by a cluster of newly armed locals. Others set about trying to extinguish the spreading fires. The entire scene was a melting pot of panic. Malin saw a soldier raising a shotgun toward a small group of children. She fired instinctively, forcing the attacker to dive for cover. Another soldier lunged at her from behind, and she reeled, only narrowly avoiding a fatal blow. She retaliated with a hasty round that hit the soldier in the leg, toppling him. When the smoke began to clear and dawn's pale light emerged, the settlement was left a smoldering ruin in several places. Many had fallen on both sides. The Barrand's men, though still capable of fighting, withdrew to regroup, understanding they'd stepped into a hornet's nest. Their battered hovercraft retreated along the river, shimmering silhouettes fading into the early morning haze. They would undoubtedly return with reinforcements, but for now, Ashwood Bend had survived. In the distance, one could still hear an engine's echo fading, leaving behind only the crackle of embers and the pained moans of the wounded. Malin stumbled over to where several villagers huddled. The caretaker from the makeshift clinic approached, face ashen from shock and grief. Yet, against all odds, the settlement still had their new filtration units. Children who had been on the brink of death now clutched precious bottles of clean water. There were casualties, but not a total annihilation. The caretaker's voice trembled. "Thank you. You saved us." Shaken, Malin shook her head. "This was just one battle," she said, pausing to catch her breath. She stared at the battered remains of the village, the lingering trails of smoke rising like sorrow into the dawn sky. They'll be back. We must be ready. She gazed at the villagers, battered but defiant, rallying around one another to douse smoldering fires and treat the injured. Start building hidden caches for your clean water. Strengthen your defenses. I'll circle back when I can, but you've got to assume the river lords won't let this go. One of the elders, leaning on a cane, placed a quivering hand on her shoulder. We'll never forget what you brought us. We'll fight for our right to live. Malin managed a weary nod. Though she was exhausted, she knew her journey wasn't over. Other settlements beckoned. Other corners of this shattered world yearned for the taste of pure water. The river lords would no doubt intensify their crackdown. Yet the unstoppable flow of desperation and hope ran as strongly as the artificial rivers themselves. She returned to her patched boat, bruised and aching. Some villagers offered extra fuel, fresh bandages, and grateful smiles. As she started the motor, the memory of Captain Beren's fury clung like a warning. But she also recalled the children's faces, the small miracle of clean water in their hands. She'd do it all over again for that sight. The boat chugged along the murky channel, slipping into the horizon's haze. Distant thunder rumbled, a rumble that might foreshadow storms or the footsteps of an approaching army. Yet the water roared on beneath her, pulsing with promise and peril alike. Guarded by well-armed forces, it could be a river of salvation or tyranny. For those living beyond the enclaves, it was both a lifeline and a battleground where survival and freedom clashed. Malin kept her eyes fixed on the water ahead, determined to carry on. Many more lives depended on these precious Korans. One day, she thought, maybe people would stand together against the river lord's yoke. Until then, she would glide beneath the watchful drones and barbed wire, proving that, even in a world so broken, hope could still flow through the final rivers of life.